This is CSC Leaders. This is the joint venture between Common Purpose and the Duke of Edinburgh's
Trust Foundation.
Yes, Windsor Leadership Trust. That's correct. Thank you. Well, Theresa May's on their front page. This is quite incredible. What makes a city resilient? Well, she's written them a nice little letter, because she has launched the 2018 CSC Leaders Challenge. And she is saying, it's my privilege to launch the CSC Leaders 2018 Challenge. And the challenge is, what makes a city resilient? In 1956, His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, had the vision to bring together leaders from across the Commonwealth to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges. Over 60 years later, in partnership with Common Purpose, CSC Leaders continues to give senior leaders representing a range of sectors from the Commonwealth 52 members the opportunity to come together to address complex global issues. The importance of the 2018 Global Challenge cannot be overstated. From terrorism to natural disasters, and from financial stability to social unrest, the pressures on our cities are enormous. Over the coming months, the CSC Leaders alumni will be working together with many of the great Commonwealth businesses and industries to learn what makes organisations as well as cities resilient. So it's all about resilience. Now, what's interesting is, I wasn't going to mention the forthcoming royal wedding, but Prince Harry and Meghan, her name escapes me at the moment, they are getting married, of course. But what are they saying that they're going to be doing? They are going to be acting as change agents within the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth being pushed right to the forefront of global change, and resilience right at the heart of the Commonwealth agenda. So what's this all about? Well, to find out, as usual, you need to go to the UK Column website, and there we have an article written in June 2016 by Martin Edwards, The Resilient Cities Programme, Another Threat to Individual Liberties, is the question that he's asking. He says, pioneering and financially supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. He's talking about the 100 Resilient Cities project. He's talking about civil society and how that's being used to change our relationship to governance and so on. But let's take the first 100 Resilient Cities program as an example. And here's what they say on their website. This is Rockefeller Foundation. Crisis is the new normal for cities in the 21st century. Because of the collision of globalization, urbanization, and climate change, not a week goes by when there's not a disruption to a city somewhere in the world, a cyber attack, a natural disaster, or economic or social upheaval. And Brian, this is what it's about. At the center of this, they are driving chaos and crisis, and they're using crisis as the driver for crisis management, for driving the change in the way we're being governed, to driving the change in the relationship between the individual and the state. Of course, alongside globalization, urbanization, climate change, we could perhaps add terrorism and a number of other similar things, which are all generating this chaos. And chaos seems to be the central policy.
It is the central policy, Mike, and we have reported repeatedly over the last few months and weeks, of course, this statement by Danny Kruger, the advisor for David Cameron, who said that the Conservatives intended to bring in a period of what he called creative destruction, chaos, particularly within the civil service, and that's what we're seeing unfolding around us. But how shocking that we should have a Prime Minister, Theresa May, now fully in bed with this pernicious charity Common Purpose, which was getting into local authorities, steering their budgets to train its own graduates, working with the police force to do the same, into the military, and then breaking the Data Protection Act in taking the data of people who dared ask why public money was being spent on it. We then had the paedophiles that were discovered in the Common Purpose networks, Matthew Byrne being particularly a vile individual who was working with the Common Purpose Advisory Board, and yet this is the very organisation that Theresa May supports. How do you explain this, other than the government is fully supporting this disruptive change which Common Purpose is driving?
Absolutely. Bring Mark Anderson into the program. Mark, you were looking at the 2017 Halifax International Security Forum recently. There was some interesting stuff going on there. Give us an overview.
Well, you know, it's kind of funny what you were talking about with Graham about vaccines, this internal war on the internal human biological systems by the establishment. They claim to be fighting disease when in fact, in many respects, they're promoting disease. Well, take that microcosmic philosophy or outlook and put it in a macrocosmic perspective, and you have what these think tanks are up to, basically. Under the guise of standing for peace and democracy, they are actually conducting warfare on sovereignty and on the idea of self-rule or self-determination of countries. And under the guise of pushing peace, they're constantly preparing for war. So just as we have a war on children through vaccinations and the future through children, we have a war on sovereignty under the guise of peace. It's funny how the macro and the micro go together when it comes to the ruling establishment. Anyway, the Halifax Forum up in Canada happened right after the World Affairs Council of America conference in Washington, D.C., and the Trilateral Commission even met in the UK in early November, just as a footnote. But at the Halifax International Security Forum, and this is only about an 8 or 9 year old gathering, many of the other think tanks have been around a lot longer. At this, just for example, they had a video where they honored Nadia Murad, who's this social celebrity now. ISIS reportedly raped a number of her relatives a couple of years ago when Nadia was a 21-year-old student. And through a video posted on the Halifax International Security Forum website during and in the wake of this mid-November conference, they have this idea that they use Nadia as kind of a, as I say, social celebrity, political football, or stepping stone to promote the idea that world peace will come through empowering women. But by empowering women, they mean militarizing women. They mean the idea that the natural feminine and natural nurturing tendencies, the very nature of women as you know, as a God-given thing, that nurturing spirit in women, that God-given thing needs to be overturned, and women need to be inducted into the military. And in fact, the video that's posted after they show Nadia being honored for overcoming what happened to her family by these ISIS militants and the rape and the torture and all this stuff that reportedly happened, they show many images on this video of women being regimented and being marched around like soldiers and in full infantry fatigue and carrying fully automatic rifles and marching in formation, and the idea that they can man up and be just like men. And they'll do things like they'll show the word manpower, and they'll show women marching in formation with their rifles or during basic training, and then they'll remove the word man and simply show the word power under the women being marched in a regimented fashion. And behind this, there's a song playing, "I am a superwoman, yes I am. I am a superwoman, yes I am." These are the lyrics to the song. So Mike and Brian, what we're seeing here is a war on gender. And these people that are so dedicated toward peace and democracy at the Halifax International Security Forum are actually overturning the idea of the basic natural made, the natural structure of humanity, and driving women into the idea of being soldiers and to come home in body bags rather than being the nurturers, the God-given nurturers of society. So it's amazing that the people that conduct these and other think tanks can get off saying that they're so in favor of peace and democracy and healing the world, when in fact they're constantly at war with the world, whether it's through the vaccine system, whether it's through being gender benders and having a war on gender, and in so many other areas. So this is one of the things that jumped out at me. Another thing I'll mention very quickly is that a video, another one posted on the Halifax website, shows the atomic bomb being dropped on Japan. And in one sense, it seems to be saying that, that's a bad thing. The title of the video was Nukes, the Fire and the Fury. And there was an associated conference discussion at the Halifax event about nukes. But the short video basically romanticizes the atom bomb being dropped on Japan. There's even kind of cabaret jazz music playing in the background. And part of it is kind of eerie. The lyrics say, "We'll meet again some sunny day," implying that the sun is actually the atom bomb going off. We'll meet again some sunny day. And so you have these dystopian and disturbing videos that show the world being overturned under the guise of democratic advancement and under the guise of peace. And so I'm covering some pretty broad ground here, but this is the mentality, this is the ideology of what we're seeing at the Halifax forums and some of the related forums conducted by the One Worlders.
Well, perhaps Mark's comments lead into this quite nicely.
Well, it's incredible, isn't it, Mike? So Mark was talking about world peace by empowering women, and several people flagged this Breitbart article up. Girl Guiding UK allows transgender guides to share showers, tents with girls. Girl Guiding Chief Executive Julia Bentley stated that the move to allow male children to join as guides allows rules set out in the Equalities Act 2010, which makes clear organisations providing single gender services should treat people according to their acquired gender. And we now know that that acquired gender is whatever an individual chooses to call themselves on a particular day of the week. Well, we spoke to the Girl Guides team this morning, and we got a response from their PR officer. This is the statement. They've given back exactly what we've already had up on screen, but they say if a young person doesn't feel comfortable sharing accommodation for whatever reason, we encourage them to talk to their leader about alternative accommodation and facilities. More private areas for changing can be made available to any young member who requests it. We also provide guidance for our leaders to help them when handling sensitive issues. So the child who's happy with their sexuality but says, I don't really want to share a shower with a boy, that girl is then excluded from the showers. She's isolated and put in her own shower. So amazing conversation. I'll come back to my discussion with the PR officer, but let's have a look at the chief executive. Here she is, Ms. Bentley. So that's the quote from the main part of the paper. There we are. In line with our values of inclusion, we welcome any young person who self-identifies as a girl or young woman. So it's only what you choose. And of course, this doesn't just relate to the Girl Guides themselves. This also covers staff. So I did ask the PR lady whether she would be happy to share a shower with a man who identified himself as a woman, but she didn't want to answer that question. She just came back on the government guidance. And Breitbart a little while ago, 2013, also reported that the Girl Guides had decided to do away with any mention of God because that was a bit messy and it could discourage some people from joining. Well, what's this about? You get a clue from the website itself, because if you have a look at the Girl Guiding website, what you are faced with is political campaigning, social action. This is more change agenda, and this is a big attack on young girls and young women. Action for change, campaign to end sexual harassment, girls matter. Well, clearly girls don't matter because they're saying you can be a boy and join the Girl Guides. But what a fascinating lady the chief executive is, because she's able not only to do Girl Guiding, she's also part of DHL UK Foundation. That's at the top of her little CV there. And I encourage you to go and have a look at this. This is DHL, the deliveries company. There's Ms. Bentley. And I just thought it was interesting that one of her board members is John Nestor, investment management, latterly with UBS Global Asset Management and on it goes.
It's amazing how the bankers all become philanthropists.
The
Brian.
bankers have all become philanthropists, and everybody wants to get close to children to help them empower themselves and be who they need to be. And I'll just end on this one, which Breitbart had embedded in the article on Girl Guides. Primary schools adopting the plan faster than secondaries, and this is LGBT curriculum program, gender neutral uniforms adopted. So let's remind ourselves this is policy, and this policy has been created by a number of people through government and of course the policy advisors behind them. And it's quite clear this policy has come in with equal force across both the Conservative and the Labour administrations. So a massive attack on young girls and the identity of children as a whole. And we know that this attack can cause long-term psychiatric damage of these young children. Time parents spoke out, I think.
Very quickly, Mark.
I can't help but observe that right as the one worlders and the think tanks and their associated institutes are saying that women need to largely leave the home or at least downplay their motherhood and enter the military. So as parenthood is steered off the cliff in that direction, the kids themselves are confused in their gender and told there really is no such thing as gender. At the very same time, out of the other side of the mouth, you might say, the flip side of the coin. So clearly, the one worlders and their associates in banking and journalism are, even if they don't quite realize it, they're at war with the world while saying that they're out to solve the world's problems and create world peace. It's really the ultimate hypocrisy that we can imagine, and deception.
Absolutely. Good news, Brian. We're going to spend £50 billion divorcing ourselves from the EU. That's according to the Independent and Sky News and the Mirror. Because we've reached an agreement over Brexit. They're all crowing about this. Paying Brexit bill is Britain's obligation, says Grayling. We'll come on to that in a second. The BBC said the UK divorce bill offer worth up to £50 billion. They say that number 10 has played down reports. The final figure could be up to €55 billion, which is £49 billion at today's exchange rate. They say that the EU says the UK needs to settle its accounts before it leaves. It says that the UK has made financial commitments that have to be settled as part of the overall withdrawal agreement, and so on. So the question is, what is this? Is it a divorce bill? Well, you could look at it another way. It's around 4 years of contributions at the current level, because we're currently spending, about £13 billion a year. So that's about 4 years of contributions there, is possibly how we might look at it. And we'll come on to that in a second. Let's see what Chris Grayling actually said. He was speaking on BBC Radio 4 this morning. He said, "We've been very clear that we will meet our obligations as a member of the European Union as we leave." So let me see that. We have very clearly meet our obligations as a member of the European Union as we leave. Can you work that out? Not quite sure. Are we a member? Are we not a member? It's not really clear from that. He went on to say, we don't want to walk away on bad terms. We don't want to walk away from obligations that we built up during our membership. Our goal is to be good friends and good neighbours with the European Union and to trade freely with the European Union, to carry on as friends. The price is meeting the obligations that we built up, no more and no less than that. Well, in fact, if we think back only to September, Theresa May was suggesting that that price was €20 billion. Now it's €55 billion. Which is it? Is it more or less? It's hard to say. And he went on to say, I don't think people in this country would expect us to just walk away from things we've already said would pay for. I'm not sure whether he's correct on that, Brian. No, right. So
I'll just stay quiet, Mike, because these things are becoming so bizarre.
Yes, right. So anyway, let's look again, consider again. Are we walking away? Let's look again at what he said. We've been very clear that we will meet our obligations as a member of the European Union as we leave, but we're not leaving. And I'm not sure how many times they have to tell us that we're not leaving, because this is what David Davis said not very long ago, or at least this is what the exiting the EU department said in a tweet watch David Davis closing the third round of negotiations to forge a new partnership with the EU. This isn't about leaving the EU, and they keep telling us it's not about leaving the EU, but for some reason everybody keeps talking about leaving the EU. This is not what they're doing. Let's remind ourselves what Theresa May said a couple of months ago. We will continue to work with our NATO allies, our European neighbours and the EU to support a future partnership of unprecedented breadth and depth. Now, I accept that in this particular comment, she's mentioning NATO and others, but in other statements that she's made, she's been quite specific about a future partnership of unprecedented breadth and depth with regard to the European Union. So, what can you say about that? I don't know, as I say, how many times we have to say it. We're not leaving. So what is this money for? Could it be that we are in fact making this commitment because we'll continue to pay into the European Aviation Safety Agency, or perhaps Europol, or perhaps we'll continue to spend money to opt into Euratom and a host of other European EU agencies. And let's not forget defence. We will continue to pay into the European Defence Agency and the 5.5 billion euro European Defence Fund. Well, as we said a couple of days ago, on Monday, despite the fact that we didn't sign up to PESCO, we seem to be taking part in PESCO workshops. So I'm not quite sure how that works.
Well, they're present, but they're not taking part. They're just taking part.
Yes. So are we leaving? Are we not leaving? Well, then let's look at this, because let's remind ourselves once again, the European Withdrawal Bill 2017 to 19. This is nothing about withdrawing from the European Union. What this is about is making sure that all EU legislation is put onto the UK statute books. And I'm going to say that it's absolutely certain in my mind, and in some other people's minds as well, that the EU and the UK legislation will be kept in sync from that date forward. And it has to be, because the UK is going to be tied into a partnership of greater depth and breadth than we've ever seen before. So how can it be anything other than keeping laws in sync? If we're in a trade deal with the EU, there's going to be laws associated with that are going to be kept in sync. If we're in a defence agreement with the EU, there's going to be laws associated with that are going to be kept in sync. And the same goes for every agency that we opt into. And I'm going to say again, you compare Theresa May's position today with David Cameron's position before the referendum, and the only difference in language is that Theresa May claims we're leaving, David Cameron claimed we were staying, but in his case he wanted to opt out of institutions that we didn't agree with, and Theresa May says, well, we don't agree with the EU institutions, we're going to leave, but we'll opt into the ones that we do agree with. And I cannot see the difference in these two positions. So I'm going to bring Alex in first here, because Alex, we seem to have had a letter passed to us from Earl Howe with regard to military unification for a start. And let's just have a quick look at what this says. With regards to the relationship with between our armed forces and the EU, I can assure you, your constituent, that there is absolutely no question about the UK relinquishing sovereignty of our armed forces. It's important to understand that several member states, including the UK, have made it clear they do not support an idea of an EU army. There's no plan to establish one. What is necessary is for national armed forces to be able to work together effectively when they're called upon to act. And fundamental to our approach is for the EU's contribution to defence and security be complementary to and respect the role of NATO, which is the cornerstone of our defence. Well, again, let's come back to this again. If that is true, why is the UK taking part in workshops to develop PESCO, which is developing the European Union military? So Alex, bringing you in first, what are your thoughts on that and the this sum of money that is apparently, allegedly claimed to be for the divorce between Britain and the European Union?
Well, on the latter point, my gratitude to David Ellis, who's elaborated another theory, the opposite of a divorce, which I'm sure he'll be talking about in a moment. But that makes perfect sense if you compare Britain's strategic position now with the position in Henry VIII's reign, or particularly England and Wales in those days. There is a national determination to break free from the continental agenda, but the real powers on both sides of the English Channel do not wish to see that, and so they, for different reasons, they dress it up as something other than it is. But this letter from the Earl Howe replying to an MP to send on to a constituent is, to my knowledge, the first time that the government, quite a senior person, the Minister for Defence, so the number 2 in the government responsible for military policy, Earl Howe, has said, as close as he can to saying it without getting lynched, basically, yes, we do support PESCO and the EU is in lockstep with NATO. He doesn't mention defence procurement in that letter, of course. He talks about the stuff that the Continentals like to dwell upon, preparedness to face joint challenges in shared operations. But inevitably, if he's selling PESCO to us, then he's selling defence industry unification as well.
So, David, is this a divorce settlement or is it a dowry?
Well, you could argue that. It certainly looks like a dowry, doesn't it? Because they're talking about a new relationship, a new deeper and special relationship, as if it's something akin to Macmillan's FISMAT special relationship contract with the nuclear material with the Americans back when we started developing pits and piles ourselves. So, I mean, taking it from the top, the slide you put up there with Theresa May, the sort of shadow language is all about defence and military. And we're clearly seeing there that obviously, whilst they haven't signed for the time being, it's the caveat, PESCO, the government is clearly taking part. And that dovetails in beautifully there with the letter from Earl Howe that we've got hold of, where he's basically just saying exactly as Alex has said. So what we've got to come back to is all this hocus pocus about trade. What exactly are these people trading? Because this isn't a trade deal to do with, whether Britain is going to play nicely with tariffs to do with straight cucumbers. The whole nub of all of this is to do with vast amounts of money, national militaries, and defence contracts, and the supranational global defence companies. So that's the big picture. That's what all this is about. And I've said this for quite some time, is that this whole thing really anchors off it. There are 2 fundamental components for unification of Europe, the EU zone, if you want to call it, and that is that all of the nations' national currencies need to be unified into one. So they've pretty much done that. And the next thing is they need to unify all of the national militaries into military union. And the framework that they're going to do that under is this thing called PESCO. So Earl Howe there has basically told us what the government's position is. Now, the government isn't necessarily as we think it is. It's obviously there's quite considerable workings and offices beyond the Prime Minister that we see. And this is where the heart of the matter lays. So thanks very much for the person that's got that Earl Howe letter in and got it to us, because it really does. The language in it is very, very specific. It tells us exactly what the status is. Yes.
Any thoughts?
Well, the minimum we can say, Mike, is that we're not being told the truth by our government. All of the correspondence we see, all of the comments that are made to the mainstream media, just a huge smokescreen. So you ask yourself, why the smokescreen? Because there's dirty deals going on behind closed doors. 17 million people thereabouts voted to come out. Some of our viewers today are suggesting that the figure must have been far, far higher. So the government absolutely terrified of that force of opinion in the British public, and they're going to lie, cheat and deceive and have meetings behind closed doors in order to get this policy through.